This episode is brought to you by Dead Ground. Yes, Dead Ground. Dead Ground is a procedure-generated tower defense game with roguelike elements. Each playthrough will offer you randomly generated gun skill and augments. You'll have to travel, collect scrap, collect water, manage inventory, and upgrade your base to survive. Dead Ground releases in early access on the 1st of February. Guys, go and get the game. And no, they didn't pay us for this. It's a good game, so we thought we'd prop them up a bit. Meow.
When the tide of the fight has been shifted, our hopes are falling down.
And welcome back. It's another one of those podcasty things. Yes, it's the Bammsters Rated R show. My name's 𝙁𝙪𝙩𝙯, but hey, you can call me G. And it is the week of January 29th, episode 102. I'm suddenly glad we actually made the whole number thing 3-digit. With me, all the way over from California, and I don't know if he's in old California or New California, but it's Drac. Say hi, Drac.
Hey, folks. And, well, I don't know, I guess that's yet to be determined as to whether or not I'm going to be part of old or New California. If it even splits. But yeah, what, episode 102? We now have more episodes than they had in Dalmatians, so we got one up on Disney.
I think there was a sequel called 102 Dalmatians.
Was it one of those straight-to-video ones?
I think so.
Okay, well, I guess maybe next week I can make that claim then.
So, we have a nice one this week. No big interviews, we had a little thing. Drac got together with a bunch of his old friends, people that I happen to know, might have been my suggestion even, where they did a player's Post Mortem on Swordcoast Legends, a game that we've talked about before, and Drac and I actually bonded over old back in the days. The game's dead. End of story. But they still decide to talk for an hour about it, and we have that coming later on.
Yeah, the game, I guess, has been more or less dead for a while, but I think it was the final stake in the heart, so to speak. But yeah, it was G's idea. It was a great idea, I think, and unfortunately, last minute we had some scheduling conflicts, and I was a little bit sad you couldn't make it, dude, because I thought, you know, that would have been one of those things that would have been cool to have you on. I think you would have enjoyed it.
I was busy having a nail removed from my foot, so what can I do?
All right, then.
But
so
yeah,
shall we get into the games coming out next month?
Well, before that, how about another game that's dying?
Uh-oh.
Paragon, Epic's MOBA, the third-person shooter MOBA. The only MOBA I actually ever found interesting has been cancelled.
I think it's the only MOBA I've ever played, and yeah, it was kind of fun. I never really got into the whole MOBA phase, but this one was a little bit fun to play.
It's just weird, because Bam and I have been playing various games online together, and so far the only one that hasn't been cancelled is Warframe. Everything else has been cancelled, closed, shut down, burned to the ground. So it's just a fun one. I figured I would mention it because it just came out. Fortnite, the new Epic game, has killed the old one, Paragon.
Yeah, I think they maybe underestimated the popularity of Fortnite there.
They overestimated some of the changes they made to Paragon, but that's a completely different thing. Perhaps we at one point will do a Paragon post-mortem. Probably not, because we don't quite have the people like we did on Swordcoast Legends, but we'll see. Bam will probably have some opinions about why and how and what they did wrong.
No. Bam? Have opinions?
Yeah, but that's not what we're here to talk about, because, as I said, January 29th, that means it's the end of a month, or the beginning of a month, depending on, you know, how we mess things up releasing this episode. That means future-proof. That means games coming out in February.
Yeah, depending on how you want to look at this and how we remember to title it from time to time. The idea was, you know, upcoming games is the games that we see are coming out and we find interesting and potentially fun to play, whereas I think Bam's idea with future-proof was let you guys know what to avoid.
Yeah, and I was just, as part of the prep, I looked up also, you know, articles that others have written about what games come out, and I giggle a bit. There was a Forbes article saying all the games coming out in February 2018. It's like, no, there's about 20 games every single day in February, 20-something every single day in February. So no, that list they had was nowhere near complete, and neither is this. But it's the games we thought was interesting, we thought should have a mention at least.
Yeah, man, the stuff that gets released nowadays, I should say the sheer amount of stuff being released nowadays, it's nuts. And there's no way we could keep up with all of it.
7,500 all of last year, just on Steam. Anyways, Drac, it's your list. You know what's in it. And I say it's your list because literally almost every single game says Switch here, so, you know.
That'd be a fun little dig at BAM, but it honestly was not intentional. And hey, I think you added half the Switch games to this list, so you're going to have to shoulder some of the blame for that. But, yeah, no, the first one that's up here is a game called Skyforce Reloaded, which, you know, if you're an old fart like me and used to play some arcadesy type games back when you could go walk into like a movie theater or whatever while you're waiting to, you know, play games or waiting to watch movies and play video games on an arcade. This is one of those. You're flying around and you got the pretty background that's kind of floating underneath you, and you've got a plane or a spaceship, and you know, shooting at things and dodging all kinds of bullets and missiles and other explosions and things coming at you, and picking up power-ups as you go. So these were always fun for me. It's, you know, pretty action-packed, and this kind of brings back some of that nostalgia. It looks like it'll be a fun one to play.
But this, yeah, that's the Nintendo Switch release, but it was out on Steam already, 2017? So November, so yeah, a couple of months ago.
Yeah, the end of last year, I think, end of November.
If I can just say, I like these kind of games myself as well. There was one we covered last year, Dimension Drive. It was also one of these shoot 'em up from bottom to top style. But it took a nice twist in that you kind of have two maps parallel to each other and you jump between them. Try that one, check that one out. Going into the next one. Yeah, I just said Skyforce Reloaded is a re-release if it's just a couple of months later, but this one, Shadow of the Colossus, or if you're stuck in Japan, Wanderer and the Colossus, is coming to the PS4 in extra high quality graphic-y things.
Yeah, this was one I saw was releasing, but I didn't put on the list only because I was looking at it as a re-release, something that I knew had been out for quite a while. I don't remember exactly when it was originally released, though.
Well, I'm over here in Soviet Europistan, so 2006 on the PS2, but it goes back to 2005, late 2005. Japan released it somewhere around that. And then it got re-released in the HD version for the PS3 in 2011, and now it's the PS4 version, the extra HD version. When the PS5 comes out, they'll re-release it, and it'll be Super Ultra HD version. It's one of those games. It is genre-defining, except it's kind of its own genre where, you know, you run around these giant areas of almost nothing, except the colossi that you have to hunt down and kill. Don't want to get too much into the story because I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't played it, but it's a very somber, very nice game, and it really set a yardstick for everything else came after it.
So what you're trying to say is this is the PlayStation equivalent to Skyrim?
Yeah, except Skyrim is just a zombie of a different game that's basically the same, of a different game that's basically the same. Yeah, a little bit. This one is just a single zombie that just keeps coming back.
Alright, well next up was one that I thought was a new release, but G informed me no, this one's actually a re-release as well. Dragon Quest Builders. So I guess it'll be releasing in February for the Nintendo Switch. And it caught my attention because it's got this very Minecraft look and feel to it, which for myself, I don't know, I kind of got a little bit bored with Minecraft after the initial going in and seeing what it was all about and what you could do with it. And my little one, though, she loves Minecraft. She still plays it every chance she gets. And, you know, her and I will play a little bit of Portal Knights, which is another fun one. A little more updated graphics, but similar type of, you know, game style with the blocky type construction. And this looks to be that in that same kind of vein, but looks like it leans a little more towards Portal Knights with more of the updated graphics and look.
It has a nice look to it, a nice feel to it. And I'm also saying, you know, my kids love Minecraft. This I would get for them. But, you know, I know you are glad that you have a Switch and you're seeing this game, but the sequel is supposed to come out later this year on all the other platforms.
Are you trying to tell me I'll be getting a sequel on the Switch as well soon?
Let's just say you shouldn't hold your breath. But hey, if you want to play on the Switch, get Dragon Quest Builders. If you're on PS4, there might be a sequel later this year.
Alright, and next up is one that I know that a couple of us have kind of looked at a couple of times over the past, year or two? Kingdom Come Deliverance. Looks like that'll finally be releasing the middle of next month.
For PC, PS4, and the Xbox thingy. This one actually scares me a bit. This looks like a game you could sink way too much time into. Even though it doesn't have that whole huge MMORPG thing, it's a basic It's magic-free RPG set in Poland. Well, what would they call Poland, I guess. And tells a nice little story, and all the effort they put into it. I followed the motion capture work, the voice capture work. Brian Blessed is in it, so hey, that's always a thumbs up in my opinion. They've really gone balls to the walls on this one, and it looks like it's gonna be awesome, but it looks like it's gonna take, well, an eternity to play. And I'm tempted to skip it. That's all I can say. I'm tempted to skip it because I think I'm gonna sink too much time into it.
I wish I could get the time to sink into these things like this, because this game looks amazing. Just from the look and feel of the game and some of the stuff like you mentioned, the motion capture and how combat is supposed to work in the game. I would love to be able to sink enough time to really play a huge chunk of this game. For myself, only because the fact that I don't have the kind of time I'd like to play something like this. I probably won't pick it up at release. But if I did have the time, I probably would have already pre-ordered the game because it looks that exciting. It looks really good.
Yeah, if you're into this sort, check it out if you have enough time. There's not much else to say. It is awesome looking. It looks like, they got all the combat correct, they got all the visuals correct, they really went to town with all the historical details. Labor of love, I'm gonna say, but yikes. After that, February 16, Bayonetta 1 and 2 for Switch. I like this track. You got your Switch, you complained about lack of games, and now they're just releasing all these older ones, re-releasing everything for the Switch.
Wait a minute. I complained about a lack of games? When did I do that? I haven't even had enough time to finish the games that I do have on there.
Well, perhaps that was what you're complaining about, not enough gaming.
Yeah, usually my complaint isn't a lack of games, it's a lack of time to play all the games. I still haven't even picked up Mario Odyssey as much as I want to play that, because I'm trying to force myself at some point to make some time to finish Horizon Zero Dawn on the PS4, which I still haven't finished.
Well, I don't know whether Bayonetta would be something for you. I have Bayonetta 1, I don't have Bayonetta 2 because that only came out on Wii U, I think. And it seems that they basically went Bayonetta, let's keep that on Nintendo. Because Nintendo has all the cute games such as this one where you play as a witch who has so much hair it covers her body and which she uses to cast spells. At which point you basically become naked. It's a slightly weird thing to put out there on a platform that's largely recognized as a platform for kids.
It's not one I've played before. I've heard the name and I've seen the character, but I've never played the game.
It is actually a nice little puzzler, and the combat is pretty awesome. It's just a little bit odd theme, but I like this whole, she is just one bad bitch that will go to town, knocking up everybody. And the graphical themes, the little angels that you're beating up, it's awesome. It is a great game, at least Bayonetta 1. But I understand the controversies around it, and it's one of those, check it out before you get into it. And some of the people who've complained about it, I think, would have a field day if they see that this release will have costumes that you can dress Bayonetta up. Princess Peach, Princess Daisy, Link, and Samus Aran. There's something wrong about dressing this character up in cute little Princess Peach costumes. But hey, if that's your thing, knock yourself out.
Alright, well, and the next one we have on our list is one that comes with no shortage of controversy. Metal Gear Survive. So Konami is going through and releasing a new Metal Gear game that I guess has caused a lot of issues, mostly because those who are fans of the series say that this doesn't look or feel really anything like Metal Gear. It's got survival elements in it, which for myself, I'm just not a fan of the survival elements. I spend way too much time worrying about the silly little tickers on, am I gonna starve to death? Am I gonna die of thirst? Or I ate something and now that killed my thirst meter and now I gotta go find some water. And it takes away from the enjoyment of the game. You spend too much time micromanaging all these little tickers rather than just being able to explore the world and enjoy, however the combat works. So for myself, this is probably going to be a pass, at least until it's on some incredible Steam deal or something like that. But for folks who enjoy survival games, this may be something worth taking a look at.
But that makes it Metal Gear. It's frustrating until you die from it. That seems like Metal Gear to me.
Yeah, well, tell that to the fan folk that are upset that I think that Snake's not in it and the other changes that they've made.
Yeah, but Metal Gear at some point is dead. At this point, One, it's just zombie after zombie now. And with What's-His-Face having left the whole franchise and left the developers, what's left? What's in them? What can they put out that's actually gonna hit and make the player base happy? I would write off the whole franchise at some point. Looking at your list, you actually have one that's not... Well, the last one wasn't even a Switch game. Now this is the next one. Sword Art Online Fatal Bullet. So, I haven't really looked at this one, Drac. It's your suggestion for things we should talk about. But based on the name alone, I'm assuming it's Japanese.
Yes, definitely. The funny thing about this one is I saw the title, so I went to go look at some of the videos and pictures and stuff from gameplay just to see what it was all about. And just watching how the characters move and how they fight and stuff, it reminded me of a game I played back in early 2000s, I think it was, called Oni. It was a game that was at the time released by Bungie, and it had a very Japanese anime style to it, but the combat was...
You've spoken of that one before.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, the combat was so much fun, and I wish Bungie would bring this game back. It was similar in the way that it worked like Mass Effect, or not Mass Effect, I'm sorry, Mirror's Edge. There's a lot of running, hand-to-hand combat. You could strip enemies of their weapons and then use those weapons. But it was definitely a lot of fun. Now, the combat for Sword Art Online, I'm not seeing necessarily a lot of hand-to-hand combat. I was seeing a lot of like run and gun style, but just the way that the characters moved and the look and feel of the game did remind me of Oni. So it gave me some of those like old school retro kind of feels, even though the graphics themselves are not old school and retro. They look a lot more updated and actually really cool.
Don't really have anything to add.
Well, I'd say the only other thing I had to add is if you're bored with a typical MMO, I expect the way that this works as far as it being an MMO is going to be similar to other MMOs, but the look and feel of the game, at least for myself, is a little bit refreshing from the typical MMO that I've played.
Okay, you have one left on the list. We're almost done. We're almost at the end.
Yeah, I left this one on for Bam, because I'm sure that this would be something right up his alley. It's called Gravel. Releases on PC, PS4, Xbox One late next month. And it looks like an off-road racing game, but then again, I just watched him do some kind of racing. He was streaming from his PS4 the other day, and I don't know, maybe if we get a key for this, maybe we don't want Bam to try it out, because it looked like he was just all over the place and crashing into things. I think he needs a lot more practice.
Okay, sorry, I have to do this. The game is called Gravel. Isn't that more a game for grit?
There you go.
Yeah, bad jokes, I know. What can you do? It's late, it's like midnight here. Yes, it looks like a nice game, but it's not alone. There's a whole pile of these racing off-road, dirt and dirt pretty much. It's done. I didn't see anything that's new in this one. I didn't see anything that was its reason for existing. Its unique selling point, as Uncle Pyrex would put it. It's interesting, but it's not more interesting than you can pick up a ton of other similar games. So unless the developers want to come and explain to me why this one is special, it's a bit of a pass here.
I think most of the racing games I've played in recent past have been things like Mario Kart, or there was the tabletop racing that I've been playing a little bit of on PC. I haven't done too much of the more realistic looking ones, which this, at least from the little bit of material I've seen, seems to fall closer to the more realistic looking, but it did mention something about being able to do stunts and stuff, so I kind of expect it'll probably go outside the bounds of reality with that.
Well, I'll put it this way. If you want to play something pseudo-realistic racing, rejoice, because Burnout Paradise is coming back, apparently.
I think I might have played one of those Burnout games once way back.
Burnout were good games, but Burnout Paradise was, to me, that was the best one. A lot of people complained, but no, that one with the soundtrack, with the stunts and the open world and everything, that really hit a lot of correct check marks for me. And if they're re-releasing it, the only worry with it is, are they gonna be able to put in Paradise City as the theme music? Because music licensing for video games is a nightmare. I doubt they've been able to take a contract that lets them license it for this long.
Well, and on that note, I guess we are going to wrap it up for the week, at least for the A block here. Stick around, because after the break, I will be back with Mad Hatter, Joe Coleman, and Reduns Go Fasta from the SCL forums. Each of these guys kind of played big parts in different parts of the community Mad Hatter was working off and on with the developers and working to see what he could do modding the game. Joe Coleman had run, I think it was like 2 or 3 different campaigns and was live streaming that information. And man, Red, his set design was just off the charts amazing. He's if you ever as a video game developer, if you were ever looking for somebody who was just made it really look like a work of art, he does great with that. So stick around after the break and you can listen to us do our Post Mortem, talk about game development from start to finish, things we thought they did good, the things we thought they did bad, and a little bit of insight. We weren't able to get any of the developers because they're still covered under an NDA, but the little bits and pieces that some of us were able to get throughout the development cycle and pass on to you guys.
Yeah, just a reminder, they're gonna say SCL a lot. It's Swordcoast Legends, Dungeons & Dragons, 5th edition. But sadly, I won't be there because, as I said, I was busy hammering something into an arm. That's all from me. Guys, I'm out of here. Enjoy the rest of the episode. And cut.
The Bammsters rates on our show where console peasants and PC master racers unite in glorious bacon.
Alright everyone, and welcome back to our Bammsters show. This time around, we've brought a few folks from the Swordcoast Legends forums community to do kind of a post-mortem on the Swordcoast Legends video game that came out back in, it was released in October of 2015 on Steam, and then later on console in July of the same year. So with me today, I have Joe Coleman, Mad Hatter, and Reduns Go Faster. Guys, say hi.
Hello.
Hello.
So before we jump into everything, I figured we'd maybe just do a quick little roundtable since we were lucky enough to get you guys here kind of from a little bit of a different aspect to the community. If you could go through each one at a time, I guess we'll start with Joe, then Hatter, then Red. Talk about how you participated in the community, the things that you were doing there.
Sure. So I was running 2 pickup group DM sessions per week when the game first came out. I used the tool to build sort of one-shot, I called them dungeon crawl pluses, where it's sort of like a one-shot story. You could pick up a couple people and just run and play it with a live DM.
Hey, I was involved in the modding community, so I worked pretty closely with the development studio to implement methods, change the way that the game works, with the end goal of turning Swordcoast Legends into what it should have been.
I used to run 2 study groups, heavy role play, and, build levels for the game.
I don't know. I don't know if I would say build. I think what you did, Red, was more art.
I call it building. It's not
And so, for those of you who may be listening who don't know what Swordcoast Legends was, it was a tabletop, or actually I shouldn't say tabletop, but it was a computer role-playing game based in the Dungeons & Dragons Forgotten Realms. And it was advertised as 4 with 1, where it would be 4-player co-op along with an optional dungeon master who could run the creatures in the game for you. So I think probably we'll start out maybe with some of the things that hurt the game, because unfortunately this January of 2018 this year, they have actually now, the publisher Digital Extremes has pulled the game from Steam, so you can no longer purchase it on Steam. I didn't actually get an opportunity to check and see on the console markets if you can still purchase it, but I think, at least from the posts I saw on their forums, I think they were going to stop selling it there as well. But
so, from what I understand is that they had a licensing agreement with Wizards of the Coast, and so they decided not to renew that license because they can't sell the game.
That makes sense why they pulled it then. So we'll use the Wayback Time Machine to go back to when it was announced back in February of 2015. And started generating a lot of excitement in both the tabletop D&D crowd, as well as I think folks that were really excited for some type of successor to Neverwinter Nights. In fact, I think that may have been one of their larger mistakes. I know that they had some folks in their development team that worked on Neverwinter Nights, and some of the community updates that were coming out prior to the game's release and some of the videos they were showing, they compared it a lot to Neverwinter Nights. How much of that stuff did you guys see, or did it affect your thought process on the game prior to its release?
So the way I found Swordcoast Legends is I had just bought, or I just replayed through Neverwinter Nights. I'd gotten it on Good Old Games, I think, and replayed through it. And I was going, oh man, I wonder if there's anything new going on with this. And I actually found it searching for a Neverwinter Likes type game. So it was a hope that it would meet those expectations for me.
Yeah, for me, I've bounced around different moddable games for the last 15 years. But the one I kept going back to was Neverwinter Nights, primarily just because of how flexible it is and because my primary interest when it comes to these types of games is D&D. And when I did see Swordcoast Legends, the immediate comparison is obviously with Neverwinter Nights, and with the graphical upgrades and a lot of the user interface upgrades, I thought maybe this is the next big thing.
Yeah, well, I was like, ooh, Neverwinter Nights. Ooh, recreate any of your tabletop campaigns. Well, this is the game for me. Unfortunately, it wasn't.
I think that was probably one of the big things right there when they said you'd be able to recreate any of your favorite tabletop campaigns. And then the release comes out and it's a randomly generated map system, which was unfortunate. But I thought I heard, too, that they actually began developing the game when the 5th edition rules were still being written and changed at Wizards of the Coast. And to me, I thought that was kind of a bad idea. If for no other reason, it's easier to change things when you're writing a book than it is once you've gone into production coding a game. If the rules change.
I think a lot of people were hurt by that because what I get is when people want their D&D. It really didn't matter for me at all because I don't care about the system. It's all about the role play. I don't care what game mechanics are behind it.
I have the same feelings as far as that go. Just being able to have sort of a sandbox environment to do it with, and using whatever system you're using as sort of a framework with suggestions for you and your players to generate ideas.
Yeah, I think I take a little bit different perspective on this. I work in marketing research in real life, trying to do new product innovation and discover untapped markets and that type of thing. The D&D brand has such a strong equity with consumers. It's gone across 40 different years. I think as soon as you put that label on your game with any type of suggestion that you'll be able to create your own adventures, there's a certain level of expectation that then goes with that. And I think from a marketing perspective, I don't think they understood who their true demographic was and what the scope of the game was supposed to be in order for it to be successful.
Yeah, I remember seeing the forums were pretty heavily split. There was a pretty heavy divide between the hardcore D&D crowd that wanted it based on the rules, and you would see the arguments that it was too difficult or too boring, and then folks would point out that Neverwinter Nights followed the rules and worked out just fine. It didn't bother me when they went in favor of cooldowns. I thought that kind of works better than forcing everybody to stop and rest, and I actually like that mechanic a little bit better. But yeah, I get it. When you're publishing a D&D game, there's a certain expectation that it's going to follow those rules.
And I think a lot of it was just the way that they framed the conversation, right? Like, even in a tabletop turn-based game, even the strictest of people playing Neverwinter Nights understand that there's a 6-second quote-unquote cooldown between rounds, right? So all they had to do was use similar language and say, hey, our action timer, our turn counter is only 3 seconds long, so we're going to be able to get the action going and the animations going a little bit better and more realistic. But at its core, this is still based on D&D methodology. It's just a lot of it had to do with the way that they framed and phrased the conversation rather than the actual implementation of D&D rules.
I actually had people quit on me when we stopped playing Swordcoast Legends and switched the campaign to Neverwinter Nights because of the 6-second round timer. The players I played with, they totally enjoyed the game mechanics of Swordcoast Legends. It's way faster, almost like more action-based than most certainly at a low level Neverwinter Nights could ever be. Miss. Wait 6 seconds. Miss. I actually had that conversation like yesterday with one of my players. Like, I'm never going back to Neverwinter Nights.
So for me, I would say I have a similar feeling towards the combat mechanics in Sword Coast Legends. I like what they did a lot. And for me, as a dungeon master, a group, and for me, the thing I like least about role playing is when you get into a combat situation where you're just trying to min-max your character. I'm all about the role playing. So I liked that Sword Coast Legends actually had this fast actiony combat mechanic. So you could be like, okay, well, I set up this scenario for you. We do some talking, role playing, and then we use this as a medium to do the combat stuff and make the combat more interesting.
Well, I think that you're right. I mean, that's one of the things that worked really great because it gives you time to focus on the role playing. And then, it's that age-old D&D phrase or saying, it takes 3 hours to do a 3-minute combat or 3 minutes to do a 3-hour walk. It really bridges that gap and allows you to get through that combat much more, close to what it would be like if you were experiencing it live.
Sure. I think it ties back to 5th edition's focus, though, of, I don't know if any of you guys play that particular system in tabletop, but most combats are over within, 3 to 5 rounds. And the game is designed to go much quicker than previous iterations of the rule set. So I think, Sword Coast Legends did a good job of imitating that frenetic, fast-paced combat that is actually inherent of 5th edition rules as well. I think there's a broader, this leads into a broader conversation of the way that InSpace implemented the 5th edition rule set wasn't entirely transparent. And so a lot of the early criticism upon release were things like, I can't see the different stats or the different dice rolls, or I can't see, the monsters don't match up with what is in the game because they have too many hit points and that, and the other. I think once we cracked the files open and were able to look at it, we were able to see that, no, this is actually derived from, page 62 on the monster manual. It's exactly right here in the files. They just have a level scaling system placed on top of it. But that wasn't transparent. That wasn't advertised. That wasn't discussed. And it took somebody literally hacking into their files to even make that known across the broader community. And I think that is a failure of somebody who wants to interact with the D&D community needs to have that level of transparency and discuss, with the user base exactly what they're looking for, and then implement it in such a way that is respective of their vision, but at the same time, matches up with those expectations that a D&D game has along with it.
Yeah, I think that may have been one of the failings too that maybe they weren't able to address very well was expectation management. They kind of, the way that things were presented led a lot of the community to expect a lot more than what was initially delivered. And I'll always go back to saying this with that game. I think that given enough time, even after release and development, or if they'd been able to wait a little longer before releasing it, I think that SEL could have become the game that we all wanted it to be, especially with a strong modding community. But then on that subject, I don't think we ever really got a very strong or large modding community because the game was VAC enabled. And unfortunately, I did try, but I was never able to get an answer as to why. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts or theories.
Go ahead, Joe. So I was under the impression, I think I was talking to Prodigy, and he had been talking to people inside. They were trying to work to get VAC removed. I think it was part of their licensing agreement, though. But maybe, Mad Hatter, you got more information than I do?
Yeah, so, I was able to fortunately work with several of the developers, really cool guys. VAC it was actually coming up in the next update, just by the way. The next patch was going to remove VAC. I think I even posted on the forum the quote from Tim, even stating the date. So it was on its way out. It just never made it there. I kind of got sacked on the 1 yard line type thing. Now, as for why they implemented VAC, I think the original vision for Sword Coast Legends back when it was initially conceived was not to be a Neverwinter Nights replacement, and it was not to be build these complicated campaigns with, large arcing storylines. Sword Coast Legends was supposed to be a single-player game that had this kind of jump-in dungeon master mode, which kind of resembled like a League of Legends type competition, right? The dungeon master initially had experience points that they would gain. They had a trackable resource that they would use to summon monsters or lock doors or create hidden walls, like that type of thing, with very, very limited ability to implement story or arc or anything like that. I think as they started hitting early in 2015, as the game was starting to get built in full and all the technical work was done, that's when they saw the huge outcry from the community once they announced it back, I think, in February or something like that, where all of a sudden they realized, oh no, our game doesn't match what people want. And there was a frantic scramble to change it. The reason why 𝙑 was there is because as a game, the idea was the ideal, 1980s version of D&D where you would take your character sheet into anybody's game and be able to play that character across campaigns. It wasn't, I play with one dedicated DM. And with drop-in, drop-out co-op, if everything is 𝙑 enabled, then you know that everybody's playing on a fair playing field, right? Nobody has modified their character to have a +17 sword or have 99 strength. And by enabling 𝙑, what you've done is you've protected the game's executables and code while it's running in memory to disallow that type of hacking and modifying. So it was a total misunderstanding of what the community wanted that led to 𝙑. 𝙑 is used for competitive games or games where parity is important, and that's why they used it.
Yeah, I think 𝙁𝙪 is right on this. I don't think it was ever intended to be a 4+1 game, but more of a 4 versus 1 game. Like the Dungeon Master starting out at level 1, gaining experience and leveling up, getting more abilities to arrest the party. So yeah, I think 𝙁𝙪 is right on this.
And the multiplayer always did remind, I don't know if anyone here ever played a board game called Descent. But the multiplayer version of this game, the dungeon crawls, reminded me so much of that game, right down to the resource that the dungeon master has to summon creatures is called Threat, which is the mechanic that's used in Descent. And it's 1 player versus 4 heroes. So it reminds me a lot of that.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that's why you see a lot of the features that we wanted as role players not necessarily exist in Swordcoast Legends. It's like, why do I need to be able to design tile by tile what my dungeons look like if I'm primarily interested in, a combat-based simulator where I can throw in the occasional, like, here's a damsel in distress and I'll give you 50 experience points for saving her type thing. But overall, it was about getting in there, having some fun, throwing some monsters at your buddies, and working through a dungeon, which was a miss. That's not what people necessarily wanted. And I think if the game had been advertised that way without the D&D license, it might have had an opportunity to live a little bit longer. But as soon as you throw D&D on there with create your own dungeons, the level of expectation goes sky high in terms of what you need to deliver. The deliverables become a completely different set than what it was before.
Yeah, that's absolutely right there. Yeah, I think the moment that they allowed people to create their own mods is probably the same time or with the same stroke of the pen that they should have removed 𝙑, because I remember folks, and then I even experienced it myself when I was trying to test my campaigns at different levels. You make up a mod that allows you to level a character pretty quick and give them some equipment or something like that. And now, you don't need to cheat or hack the game. You just use the mod tools, and now you've got all this equipment that you throw in a shared chest that you can give to a first level character.
Yeah, it was a bad decision to begin with. I think this is probably me just kind of pushing my own industry and marketing research. But before we ever launched a product in my line of work, we would make sure that we understood what the target demographic wanted. And I think a lot of game studios, we have in our minds the big AAA studios that are spending tens and hundreds of millions of dollars on these games. You look at something like Call of Duty or Skyrim, and there's millions of dollars in advertising that go behind it as well, right? I think the problem is you start talking about these smaller studios like InSpace, Beamdog, that type of thing, and they just don't have, we say that it was a failure of marketing. There is no marketing. They don't have a marketing team. There isn't some guy like me sitting in an office, running surveys and crunching data, deciding, what exactly the trade-off is between different design. And, that leads to hits and misses. You know, if we just launch products into the world without doing any type of research beforehand, we don't have any basis of knowing what that product should look like. So Swordcoast Legends is a classic example of, you know, I could take that to my team and say, hey, this is what happens if we don't do what we do, right? Like, we get a product that nobody really wants. Even the people we think want this don't necessarily want this. They want a different version of this.
Yeah, well, to be honest, I said it before, but for me, it all came down, if only there had been more content and, well, maybe a decent editor. But I really enjoyed the game, and I thought Game Master mode was amazing. The ability to create new content live, that's wow.
I agree. So I had, Swordcoast Legends, I think I have 300 plus hours in it. It was one of my very favorite games of all time when the community was very, very fresh. Once the community died, it was like there's no one to do anything with. And I was also using the tools in a way that I felt like a lot of people weren't using them, in the sense of I made modules that were specifically designed to be live dungeon mastered. And it felt like a lot of people wanted to be able to create content that didn't need a dungeon master. And that was definitely felt the way it was advertised to me.
I agree on that. I mean, people were looking for their, well, mini MMOs. They were looking for creating their single player experience. And yeah, well, you couldn't do that. Not even close.
Well, I think this begins to lead us into the other side of things. So we spent some time kind of beating up the game a little bit, but we can kind of move into the things that we think actually did work really well. And one of those is that tool set and how easy that tool set was to use. You know, unfortunately, it was released with a random map generator versus, you know, something more like tile by tile and being able to completely custom design it. But even with that, the tile sets that they released looked great. A lot of the things that you could put in there to dress up the environments were really neat. And the creatures and stuff, though it was a very small group of options, at least to start out with, I at least thought you could see that this could go a long way with enough time to really add to what you had available to put into these levels.
The community update, I believe it was called like that, they released. It was such a major improvement. I had real great hopes for the game. I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome. There's going to be more stuff like this, and that expansion is coming, and more creatures, and more, let's call it placeables, to decorate my levels with. It's going to be amazing.
Well, that was another thing that I thought, at least the developers and community manager and stuff that did really well. They were listening to the community and what the community had wanted. And, you know, of course, you had folks who were really upset that it wasn't what they wanted and they kind of peeled out. But the folks who stuck around and were actually giving, you know, constructive criticism or requesting features, they did a lot of I think, redesign or maybe, you know, reworking how they had intended to develop the game to add a lot of those things into the game. So I thought they were doing really good listening and working on adding things that for those of us who stuck around and were looking for what the game could be, kind of kept us engaged and kept us excited.
Yeah, and, you know, in terms of things that Swordcoast Legends did really well, you know, once Swordcoast Legends died, I kind of went back to Neverwinter Nights, and you get an immediate compare and contrast on a modern game with a modern UI design, with modern graphics, modern audio design. And then you go back to something that was, you know, pretty decent in 2002, 2003, but you start to notice obvious pain points, right? Like anybody who's worked in some of the other games that have a DM mode, you compare the user interface that they have with the Blade menu, for example, that they had, which was a really easy, clickable, like this is how I summon monsters, placeables, VFX, like that type of thing. The Blade menu was superior to anything else out there, you know? Start talking about just a lot of the quality of life things that are inherent in modern games, and it really highlights for you how much updating, like for example Beamdog's Neverwinter Nights Enhanced Edition, in terms of what would truly make that game modern. A lot of things that Swordcoast Legends did in their interface and their audio design, that type of thing, are things that they could directly learn from and pull if they were smart instead of recreating the wheel, because that was really good work that they did.
To be honest, I can't even remember the Swordcoast Legends interface.
I agree with Hatter. It was an awesome as a DM, I could never actually DM in Neverwinter effectively. All of the real fun stuff I had with Neverwinter Nights was in Persistent Worlds, where you had like these long arching stories going on, but summoning creatures and having events was a pain in the ass. Whereas, Swordcoast Legends, like you're talking about the blade menu, that was so easy to do. You could set up an NPC ahead of time and then boom, make them visible after your heroes had cleared an area, make this NPC turn that quest on. They can get the next thing that they're supposed to go do. It was really nice as a live dungeon master versus anything else I've done, including things like Tabletop Simulator, which is something I love too.
Yeah, I think
I think another thing that stands out to me were the little floating D20s throughout your dungeon that were essentially the same as Neverwinter Nights encounters, right? They were just pre-configured, and you could scale them up or down in difficulty, that type of thing. A little bit more flexibility over what the actual monster content was in those encounters would have been nice, but the idea was really great to have, rather than a randomly painted down trigger in two-dimensional space, have like an actual representation of this is where this monster's going, this is what type of creature that's going to be. That was a really great feature. That's something that I would really like to see and implemented in some way in other games.
Yeah, their tool set was amazing in its ease of use. It's a lot of these tool sets for games you go in, and especially if you're someone who's not familiar with tool sets or even game development, it can be quite overwhelming or in some cases maybe unreachable. But this was not that. Anybody could sit down, design a few levels, an entire campaign, and that was really nice.
There was one major drawback to the way they implemented that though. Everything you did put down in a level remains selectable for the game master. Well, you guys have seen the way I like to build my areas. It usually meant that once I was done with an area, you basically couldn't click anywhere. The only way I could make my NPCs or monsters move was by having them attack a player, because I really couldn't click on anything else in the levels I did create except player. So there was no way to make stuff you did put down in a level static. It all remained interactive for the game master, and that was actually quite horrible.
Yeah, it would have been nice to have seen maybe some type of check mark or something that by default, when you're painting a level, it's not interactive, and you only make it interactive if need be.
Yeah, that would have been a huge difference.
Yeah, I think a lot of that came back to their use of the Unity engine, though. And even when they, quote-unquote, were unlocking placeables for us, all they were doing was assigning the blueprints in the Unity project to a different tree structure so that we could access them in the blade menu. And that's why, especially with some of the stuff that Prodigy was doing, you would see these really unintended consequences of, hey, if I click on that fence, it starts a conversation. Like, what the heck is up with that? And that's because those are things that, in the way that Unity works, you have all your scripts attached to objects. And so as they started unlocking some of those things, there were some unintended consequences. There was some failure in architecture there, but in terms of what went really well, I think the thing that stands out to me about Swordcoast Legends, like the 30,000 foot view, would just be the accessibility and ease of use. The ease of use in the Dungeon Master mode, the ease of use in the toolkit. And with any project, there's always this balancing act between power and ease of use, right? The easier something is, in most cases, given a fixed amount of resources, you're going to have a limit as to how much power it can actually have, and vice versa. The more powerful it is, if you just hand over game development tools to people with no ease of use or quality of life, you're going to have all the power in the world, but everybody bounces off of it like a brick wall. So I think what we saw with Swordcoast Legends was the pendulum swung a little too far the other way, and that came just from the initial scope of the project. They weren't anticipating what people really wanted to use that toolkit for.
Well, and I don't actually think they were particularly surprised that people wanted to use like a tile by tile laying system. It's just their system wasn't built to do that. If you look at a lot of the dungeons and stuff that they have in their own game, those are randomly generated too. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out what was going on and build a tile by tile laying system that would generate mod files you could use. And it turns out it just wasn't actually possible with the setup that they had.
Yeah, when I say surprised, I don't mean that, once they, in February 2015, revealed the game, it should have been any surprise. I mean, 2 years before that, when they started the project, I don't think they were anticipating that that's the type of game that they were going to build. And to your point, that's why the architecture and the technology didn't support it,
That's never been a problem for me, though. I get why people want to create their own layouts or anything, but for me, it's always about the setting. Personally, I hardly even design a story or anything. I create a setting and I set my players loose on it, and anything can happen. And that's the thing in Swordcoast Legends I totally enjoyed. I said it before, the ability to create new content, new NPCs, a cave system on the fly. That was totally amazing. Okay, well, it's not entirely the way I envision it, but I don't see why that should be a problem.
And that's exactly how I also was using the tool. But that is not what was advertised, and that's not really what. And so there was a lot of complaints coming because of that reason. Again, I had a lot of fun doing exactly what you're saying, is on the fly stuff with a live DM. The possibilities felt pretty endless to me.
There was definitely a lot you could do even with the random generation. I think where that failed is when there were people, as I see happen a lot of times with RPGs, especially anything D&D related, where they want to recreate something that was done before and they want to stay as faithful as possible to it. Or if they wanted to create something very specific and they, like for instance, if you wanted to create a level that had a labyrinth, it's not exactly something you can really do with a randomly designed dungeon layout. Now, those things are real specific and they're kind of few and far between. So there definitely was a lot you could do even with just the randomly generated levels.
Yeah, a lot of it's just the optics of the situation, right? Like as soon as that famous statement came out that said, you could recreate any of your existing tabletop dungeons and adventures and campaigns using our tool set, that created a very specific set of expectations that weren't delivered on, And then the counter... The other point that Dan famously said was that even an 8-year-old could design dungeons using these tools. I think that led to this optics situation where once we got the product in our hand, we said, no, this was designed with 8-year-olds in mind, obviously, because 8-year-olds could go in here and set up dungeons and randomly click stuff and, go and kill some monsters, and that's cool. But I definitely cannot recreate my classic D&D adventure from 1978 that's on graph paper, and I have the +1 sword hidden over here, and the long monologue with the evil guy over here. You can't do the stuff that they said you could do, and I think that's the problem. I think if it had just been said up front, like, hey guys, in order to preserve ease of use, we have this random generation where you can mold your ideas into any existing, tile set that we have, that's a different conversation, but they kind of shot themselves in the foot there.
I still remember the post I made after the game was released. You guys said I could recreate any campaign I ever played. I can't even recreate the single player campaign that comes with your game.
I think that ends up being true. A lot of things that release tools to do that. Because, I know one of the biggest complaints was there's a red dragon in the game, and yet that wasn't even an asset that was available for use at all in the tool set.
Yeah. Now, in terms of other things that, Swordcoast Legends did well, since that's kind of the segment that we're on here, we already kind of highlighted the combat. As long as you weren't looking for 6-second round combat, the combat actually felt really good. It felt like an evolved version of Dragon Age Origins, where, it was even a little bit faster, snappier to the point. Most of the animations were pretty good. I think that visually the game is kind of in that sweet spot where it's the post late 2000s, the late aughts, where the 3D models looked really, really pretty bad by today's comparison, but they're not necessarily AAA assets that would cost a ton to create. So to your point, 𝙁�13, I think that there was a good pipeline there for additional monster sets and additional player character models and equipment models and that type of thing. Had the game continued, I think it was right in that sweet spot in terms of graphical fidelity. A lot of the sound effects were really awesome. I've been doing a lot of work with the audio files recently, and they had a pretty sophisticated audio system in place with dynamic music that consisted of 3 different loops, and depending on how your combat was going, whether it was a good result or a bad result, you would get a different ending to your battle music track. A lot of that stuff is pretty sophisticated, and stuff that you would like to see in a modern game. And then even the voice acting, I think most of the voice acting was pretty good. 𝙁stands out as somebody who, you definitely recognize those characters in different games and different projects as well. And, definitely enjoyed that aspect of the game.
Did they add the option to reduce how often the guys would talk when you're giving them commands? Was that something that was added later? Because I remember I personally turned that down a little bit because it seemed like every time you'd click something, you'd get the same phrase over and over again. The voice act, again, I'm not saying it's bad. The voice acting was awesome. But just to note that I think they did add that feature later when someone said something about how frequently those clicking would cause your character to go off.
Yeah, the barks. The bark commands, it's interesting. Each character, each NPC had 103 different barks that they could set out. And another interesting factoid, those were actually named, a lot of them, exactly after the Neverwinter Night equivalent for that particular bark command, which is just kind of interesting. But yeah, I mean, a lot of them would have 3 or 4 different versions of like pain 1, pain 2, pain 3, selected 1, 2, 3, 4. And yeah, it was a little excessive, I think, in terms of the frequency.
I will also say the music was beautiful too. I have, since I think everyone got the soundtrack. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I listened to the soundtrack. Today I listen to it sometimes.
Yeah, the soundtrack was phenomenal. The only problem I had with the soundtrack was 𝙂𝙗 Zer's representatives on YouTube going after folks who were, putting up gameplay videos that had the soundtrack in the background. But I mean, he was a good get for them. That was great sound. The effects, like you said, 𝙁𝙬𝙗𝙧, those were great. Tony Porter did an awesome job on that. And we actually got an opportunity in a previous show to interview him and listen to him do like just different voices himself. He's a funny guy, and he's got, a cool range of some voices he can do. But that was a cool thing that they did as well. They started to put out like these making of videos where they were interviewing the voice cast. And I think we only got 2 of those. We got one for the gentleman that played 𝙁𝙗 and one for the lady that played 𝙁𝙧𝙗𝙧. But those videos were kind of neat to see as well.
Yeah, I really love those videos.
And 𝙁𝙬𝙗𝙧, you mentioned the combat, and that was something I wanted to make sure to bring up. I think this might be the first game I've seen that had the options. It was not turn-based specifically, but they had this real-time action, and you had the option to pause it, anytime you wanted by hitting a key on the keyboard. And they also had a bunch of different auto pause options that you could even tweak it so that it gave you a turn-based feel if that's what you really wanted. That was something else I thought was really neat and worked really well to kind of appease 2 different sides of a crowd that would be interested in the game between the turn-based folks and the real-time folks.
Yeah, gotta agree on that. And especially, indeed, like you said, that you could tweak the auto pause menu and, almost create like a Dragon Age experience. And it was pretty nifty.
Yeah, I think there was a missed opportunity with that auto pause system too, because to your point, you could create a true sort of turn-based replication of what D&D is, and with some pretty simple edits to some JSON files, you can change the cooldowns of all the abilities. I think, if the community had not revolted, and I don't want to blame the community 100%, I think that there was some due diligence on InSpace's part to figure out what people were looking for before they actually launched the game. But if there'd been a better handshake between the community and InSpace, it would have been very easy to create hey, this is the D&D version where it auto pauses and it does it on a 3 or 6 second basis, and all the ability cooldowns are then lined up with that counter to get people closer to what they wanted.
I gotta say, the community was pretty bad. I mean, there were so many people that, for whatever reason they had, hated the game and hated the company and went out of their way to make sure nothing positive could be said at the forums and on Steam. Pew. And that's been going on for a long time. Even after when N-Space went down.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think a lot of that at least started out with a hardcore D&D crowd that wanted a D&D game true to the rule set that didn't deviate. And when they saw that it was beginning to deviate in certain ways from that, they really did turn. And I at least for myself, I never understood that. I get being disappointed and maybe not getting something that you wanted out of a game. But if it's that important to you that you don't like the game, I never understood why folks didn't just walk away and allow for people who were still interested in the game to actually allow the game development to continue without them being harassed.
Yeah, I mean, that's the internet, though, right? I mean, people on the internet are typically, miserable, right? So I don't think that much of it was a surprise to me. I think in a true Post Mortem sense, what a game developer should learn from Swordcoast Legends is, first of all, if you go after the D&D license, make sure to make a D&D game, right? If you're not interested in making a D&D game, don't go after the D&D license. And that's pretty simple. And I think the second big highlight for me would be ensure that the scope of your project matches what your consumer, your ideal demographic, is looking for. Because I think the two big missteps with Swordcoast Legends were, one, you attached a D&D license and you branded it D&D without providing at least enough transparency or enough implementation of a beloved rule set, where you turned off the core demographic, that hardcore D&D guy who sits there with his player handbook, guys like me who's, have a weekly tabletop game and would really like to extend that into the digital sphere. And you just, you completely shut yourself off from who should have been the biggest advocate for your game. Those should have been the guys that were going out onto different forums and saying, hey, look, you can play D&D with this game. In terms of a small studio picking this up, I think what InSpace should have done, and this is just, Mad Hatter reminiscing about what was a great game for me, I think they should have labeled this as a starter kit. I think there was obvious holes in their development where, hey, we don't have enough money or enough time to create enough monsters to fill up a level 1 through 20 campaign. So let's put in a whole bunch of empty fluff quests and let's go in and level scale monsters and so on and so forth to make sure that we have enough content to fill a level 1 through 20 campaign. And I think they would have been much better served labeling it as a starter kit of some sort and saying, nope, we only have the 4 base classes. You've got your rogue, you've got your fighter, wizard, and you've got your cleric, and you've got your basic set of, here's your first 50 monsters. And then every month or every 2 months, we're going to put out little expansions, right? With a new class, with a new monster set, and really leverage people's acceptance, outside of a large vocal minority of DLC at this point. But that would have solved all the problems. You wouldn't have had to come up with all these fake abilities like Cleave 1, Cleave 2, Cleave 3, Cleave 4. You would have been able to really recreate what people were looking for with a defined set of expectations that would have matched better, what the game probably should have been at this point, which was a starter kit and a platform to build on in the future.
Like a digital red box. That would have been awesome.
Well, and if they were doing it like you're saying, where they're slowly releasing this stuff every month or so, they're able to respond to the community in a really nice way and give people the content that they are most asking for.
And I think that's probably been the biggest theme for those of us who were fans and stuck around the longest is the what might have been, the great potential that SCL could have been. So I know we're running a little bit short on time here. Hatter, I had just one question that maybe you can answer that I don't think quite saw an answer for. The 4-player limit, is that something that you think that they put in there as a design decision, or was there any kind of limitations in Unity that might have kept them from going like up to 6 to 8 players?
No, I imagine that was probably just a decision based on, that 4 players is your typical traditional D&D party. A lot of it has to do with UI limitations, right? Like the UI was built in such a way to where everything from the game lobby screen to the party screen has 4 slots for PCs. It was just tightly integrated into the project. If you were to go through that code spaghetti to try to figure out how to increase the player limit from 6 to 8, that type of thing, or from 5 to 6 to 8, you'd have to do a lot of work in terms of how the UI works, how does the game lobby work, how does the netcode work, like all that different type of stuff. You'd have to go and figure that out. So I think that was just an early design decision where they said, hey, typical D&D party's 4 players and a DM, so that's how it's going to be coded out and built into the project.
All right, so I will turn this now to the final question of the show, and this is something that we like to ask every one of our guests that we have on. So if you can go through each, maybe one at a time, and tell us what kind of bacon do you like? How would you like it prepared? And what type of beer, cider, or other type of beverage would you pair with said bacon?
I'm not fancy with my bacon, but I do typically prefer applewood smoked, right? I think that gives the best flavor. I'm also not huge on the crunchy bacon. I tend to like mine, and I'm also not a fan of like floppy ham bacon. So like a nice medium in between there. And then in terms of beer, cider, I'm no help there because I don't drink, man. I'm one of those kind of square lame guys.
So I've moved to the East Coast in the last couple of years and discovered delicious thick cut maple bacon, which I like super crispy bacon because I'm a normal human being, and I like it almost burnt. And the thick bacon, you can almost burn it, and it still has the great bacony flavor without all of the char. I also don't really drink alcohol a lot, but if I was going to have it with bacon specifically, I'd choose some sort of dark beer, maybe Guinness.
Well, bacon ain't like a thing over here. We just have bacon, and I like it crisp. And what I like to drink with it would be a Westmalle Triple, which is a pretty heavy blonde Belgian beer.
Well, those all sound like pretty solid choices to me. And I always suggest to folks, everybody kind of makes fun of me and laughs at it, thinks it's kind of a strange combination, but it's something I was turned on a few years ago. Pairing peanut butter with bacon, especially like the maple bacon, it tastes really good.
I have to say, I would like to try some maple bacon. We just have bacon. Bacon.
Hey, Draconis, if it's cool, I'd like to plug a little bit of work that I'm doing related to Swordcoast Legends. It's kind of popped up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so for those of you who are interested in Swordcoast Legends and how it might continue or live now that the game's not available for sale, I have been doing a little bit of work in the last several weeks, starting to transfer and rename the files into Neverwinter Nights usable format. And I've started releasing some of that on the Neverwinter Nights vault. But the plan being that, if I can get the gumption up to eventually port at least the original campaign over with all the voice acting and work that was done, that way that can live on as some sort of tribute to the InSpace team who really did, in my mind, put together a pretty good product that, shouldn't have been killed in the crib the way that it was.
So, in effect, you're going to be a code necromancer and bring this thing back from the dead.
That's the intent. Yeah, absolutely. I was trying to get Red to do the area design, but he flatly turned me down. He swiped left on me, so...
It wasn't like that. It wasn't like that. Yeah, well, I told you why I can't do it.
Maybe I'll send him some maple bacon, and we'll see if we can't work out a deal or something.
Ooh.
There we go. Well, all right, gentlemen, I greatly appreciate you joining us for this. And, at least there were definitely some things I was able to learn from this, too, from some of the things that you guys were able to get from the developers way back when. So thank you again, each of you, for joining us.
It was a pleasure to be here.
Glad to help.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
And for the folks listening, go check out the Neverwinter Night Vault and give 𝙁𝙬𝙗𝙧 some inspiration so that he can finish that up and we can get a chance maybe to play this in the Neverwinter Nights Enhanced Edition.